In 2003, one of the highest-paid athletes in the history of human civilization walked into a courtroom and declared himself broke. Not low on cash, not between deals. Broke. Mike Tyson had earned, over the course of his career, more than $400 million. Enough to buy a fleet of private jets. Enough to never lift a finger again for the rest of his natural life. He owned mansions on 3 continents. A fleet of luxury cars he barely had time to drive. He once owned tigers, real, living, 300-pound Bengal tigers, just because he could. And yet, when the dust settled, the number in his bank account was 0. Worse than 0. Here's the part that should terrify you. Tyson is not the exception. He is the rule. Multiple studies tracking professional athletes have found that a staggering share of them, men and women who earn tens of millions of dollars, face financial ruin within just a few years of their final paycheck. Lottery winners follow the exact same curve. Hand a struggling family $10 million overnight, and statistically, within 5 years, a disturbing number of them are back exactly where they started, sometimes worse. So ask yourself the question that nobody wants to ask out loud. If more money was really the answer, how is this possible? How does a man earn $400 million and end up with nothing? The answer is the most important financial lesson you will never be taught in a classroom. Not in high school, not in college, not even in most business schools, where professors will teach you how to value a company down to the decimal point, but never once explain how to build a fortune that outlives you. Here it is, stripped of all the noise. Income is not wealth. Income is water poured into a bucket. Wealth is the bucket itself. And if that bucket is full of holes, cracked by debt, drained by status, punctured by the slow leak of a lifestyle you can't actually afford, it doesn't matter how much water you pour in. It doesn't matter if you pour in $400 million. The bucket stays empty. This is the great illusion. We are trained, from the very first paycheck we ever receive, to chase a bigger number on a direct deposit slip. Work harder, get the raise. Get the raise, buy the better car. Buy the better car, work even harder to afford it. It feels like progress. It feels like winning. It is, in fact, a treadmill built to look like a staircase. And the people at the very top of the wealth pyramid, the ones who quietly control entire industries from behind the scenes, they are not running on that treadmill. They figured out a different formula decades ago. A formula that has almost nothing to do with how much you earn and everything to do with what you do in the 60 seconds after the money hits your account. So what is it? This formula they don't teach you? What do they understand at age 25 that the rest of us are still struggling to grasp at age 55? To answer that, we need to go under the hood, past the Lamborghinis, past the mansions, past every symbol of wealth you've ever been sold, and look at the actual machinery. Because once you see it, you can never unsee it. Picture 2 roads leaving the exact same starting point. The first road is flat, well-lit, and comfortable. It's called the earner's path. Every single person who has ever held a job has walked it. You wake up. You trade a finite, irreplaceable resource, your time, for a fixed sum of money. The road is linear. Walk twice as far, work twice as many hours, and you earn, at best, twice as much. There is a hard ceiling above this road, built from only 24 hours in a day, and it cannot be broken, no matter how talented you are, no matter how hard you grind. Worse, this road has a toll booth at the very start. Before you even see your paycheck, the government takes its cut. Income, in almost every modern economy, is taxed at the highest possible rate, taken first, before you've spent a single dollar. Now look at the second road. It's rougher at the start, steeper. Most people who attempt it turn back within the first mile. This is the owner's path. On this road, you are not selling your time. You are buying assets, a piece of a business, a rental property, a share of a company, the rights to a song, a patent, a piece of intellectual property. Anything that generates cash flow, whether you are sleeping, vacationing, or sitting in a hospital bed. This is the mechanism. This is the entire secret, hiding in plain sight. Stop trading hours for dollars and start trading dollars for machines that print more dollars. Think of it like a snowball sitting at the top of a mountain covered in wet, heavy snow. Push it just slightly, and it begins to roll. At first, it's pathetic, barely growing, almost not worth the effort. But it keeps rolling and rolling, and with every single rotation, it is gathering more mass than the rotation before it. By the time that snowball reaches the bottom of the mountain, it isn't a snowball anymore. It's an avalanche. That is compound growth. And it is, without exaggeration, the most powerful force in the financial universe. More powerful than a high salary, more powerful than a stock tip, more powerful than luck. The tragedy is that 99% of people never let the snowball roll long enough to become the avalanche. They stop it halfway down the mountain and cash it in for a new kitchen. There is a second piece of the machinery, and it's the part that makes the wealthy genuinely uncomfortable to talk about in public: leverage. The strategic use of other people's money and other people's time to acquire assets faster than your own income alone would ever allow. A bank will hand you hundreds of thousands of dollars at a relatively low interest rate, specifically so you can purchase a building that other people will pay you every single month to live or work inside of. The bank's money buys the asset. Strangers' rent payments pay off the bank. And you simply own the result. This is not theory. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme cooked up on the internet. This is the exact mechanism that has built nearly every dynasty-level fortune over the last 200 years. And it works whether the asset is a duplex on a quiet street, a small stake in a local business, or a single rental unit bought with a modest down payment. The size of the first step has never been the point. The direction of the step is the point. And there is no better proof of it than a story most people have never heard. A true story of two American families who started from the exact same point in history and ended up in two completely different financial universes. In the year 1877, a man named Cornelius Vanderbilt died and left behind a fortune so massive it is genuinely difficult to comprehend, even today. Roughly $100 million. To put that into perspective, at the time of his death, that sum represented more money than existed in the entire United States Treasury. Adjusted into modern terms, accounting for his share of the nation's total economic output, historians have placed his true purchasing power somewhere north of $185 billion. He had built it through ships, then doubled it through railroads. A relentless, ruthless campaign of acquiring infrastructure, physical, cash-generating assets that the entire country depended on to move goods and people. He was, by every measure, the richest man in the world. Now, fast forward less than 100 years. In 1973, more than 120 descendants of Cornelius Vanderbilt gathered for a family reunion at Vanderbilt University, a university that, notably, still carried their name. Not a single person in that room was a millionaire. Let that sink in. $185 billion in today's terms, and 3 generations later, the family that owned it couldn't produce one single millionaire. The money didn't just shrink. It evaporated entirely. What happened? The heirs inherited the water in the bucket, but never inherited the mechanism that filled it. They spent on mansions so large they required hundreds of staff just to maintain. They funded yachts, fox hunts, and a level of social extravagance that, by some historical accounts, makes modern celebrity excess look modest by comparison. They were earners and spenders, living off a pile of cash someone else had built. Nobody taught them to convert that pile into machines that generate more cash. So the pile, as piles always do, ran out. One Vanderbilt heir reportedly built a summer cottage in Newport, Rhode Island with 70 rooms, a single-family residence requiring a small army of staff just to keep the lights on. Another commissioned a yacht so large it needed its own crew of 72 men. These weren't investments. They were withdrawals. Enormous, irreversible withdrawals from a bucket nobody was refilling. Now place that story next to a different family, building their fortune at the exact same moment in history. The Rockefellers. John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into the most dominant energy company the world had ever witnessed. But the true genius wasn't the oil business itself. It was what came after. Rockefeller and the generations that followed him didn't simply spend the fortune down. They restructured it. They moved it into trusts, into diversified holding companies, into real estate, into banking, into foundations engineered to compound and protect capital across generations, insulated from the reckless spending of any single heir. More than 150 years after Standard Oil was founded, the Rockefeller family is still wealthy, still influential, still, in various forms, generating income from assets their ancestor assembled in the 1800s. Same era, same country, same starting advantage of extreme wealth. Two completely different outcomes, because one family understood the machinery of ownership and one family only ever understood the machinery of spending. This is not a story about luck or talent or even raw intelligence. It's a story about structure. And it leads us directly to the single most dangerous trap in the entire wealth-building journey. A trap so effective, it has quietly bankrupted lottery winners, professional athletes, lawyers, doctors, and yes, entire dynasties, no matter how much money they started with. Here is the trap, and it is almost invisible while it's happening to you. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it is the single most efficient wealth destruction mechanism ever created because it doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like a reward. You get a raise, $10,000 more per year, and almost immediately, before that money has a chance to become anything else, it becomes a nicer car payment, a bigger apartment, a few more dinners out. None of these decisions, on their own, look reckless. Each one feels earned. Each one feels, genuinely, like progress. But here is the brutal math nobody shows you. Every dollar you route into a depreciating liability, a car that loses value the moment you drive it off the lot, a watch, a wardrobe, a vacation, is a dollar permanently removed from the compounding machine. It cannot roll down the mountain. It cannot gather mass. It is gone, converted into a memory, or worse, into a monthly payment that now demands even more of your future income just to maintain. There is a sharp, critical difference between what researchers studying actual American millionaires have repeatedly discovered and what popular culture tells you a wealthy person looks like. The flashiest people on your social media feed, the rented mansions, the leased supercars, the watches financed at 18% interest, are, overwhelmingly, not the wealthy. They are high earners, drowning in liabilities, performing wealth for an audience. Meanwhile, the people with the actual net worth, the ones with the paid-off assets quietly compounding in the background, often drive a 10-year-old truck and nobody ever notices them at all. This is the fatal mistake, confusing the appearance of wealth with the structure of wealth. And debt is the accelerant that makes the trap so much worse. Understand this clearly. Not all debt is the enemy. Debt used to acquire an income-producing asset, a rental property, a small business, equity in a growing company, is a tool. It is leverage, working in your favor, like a lever extending your reach far beyond what your own two arms could lift alone. But debt used to acquire a depreciating liability, credit card balances for things that vanish the moment you use them, financing on items that lose value every single day you own them. That is not leverage. That is a hole drilled directly into the bottom of your bucket. And the interest on that debt doesn't just sit there quietly. It compounds too, against you, working around the clock, every hour of every day, to keep you exactly where you are. Picture a hamster on a wheel, except this wheel is rigged to spin slightly faster every single year. The hamster has to run harder just to stay in the same place. That is lifestyle inflation fueled by bad debt, a a wheel spinning faster every year, while the person on it convinces themselves they're finally getting somewhere. 99% of people who receive a financial windfall, a raise, a bonus, an inheritance, even a lottery jackpot, step directly onto that accelerating wheel. They believe, with total sincerity, that this time will be different. And then, a few short years later, they discover, exactly like Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandchildren, exactly like dozens of professional athletes, that the wheel doesn't care how much money you started with. It only cares whether you ever step off. So how do you actually step off? How do you take everything we've uncovered, the mechanism, the case study, the trap, and turn it into something you can use, starting today? Here is the formula. Not theory, not motivation. A mechanical, repeatable blueprint used in some form by nearly every fortune that has survived more than one generation. Step 1. Convert active income into owned assets, as fast and as relentlessly as possible. The moment money lands in your hands, the question is never, what can I buy with this? The question is, what can this buy that will then buy more for me? Equity in a business, a share of real estate, royalties on something you created once and can sell forever. The goal is ownership, not consumption. Step 2. Reinvest the cash flow. This is where almost everyone fails, because it requires doing something that feels deeply unnatural. Taking money that has just arrived and immediately sending it back out into more assets before lifestyle has a chance to claim it. The snowball only becomes an avalanche if you refuse to stop it halfway down the mountain. Step 3. Use leverage, deliberately and surgically. Borrow, not to fund a lifestyle, but to accelerate the acquisition of assets that pay the debt down for you. Let the bank's money and other people's labor do the heavy lifting while you hold the deed. Step 4. Build structure around what you've built. This is the lesson the Rockefellers understood and the Vanderbilts never learned. Wealth without structure, without entities, without a plan for what happens when it passes to the next set of hands, is wealth with an expiration date. Protect it the way you'd protect anything irreplaceable. Step 5, and this is the one nobody wants to hear because it cannot be hacked, rushed, or shortcut. Time. Real wealth, the kind that survives a stock market crash, a recession, even a death in the family, is built slowly, for years that feel like nothing is happening, and then, all at once, it compounds into something that looks, from the outside, like overnight success. It is never overnight. It is always decades, hiding behind a single headline. This is the formula. It was never a secret. Not really. It was simply never profitable for anyone to teach it to you. The institutions that profit from your spending have no incentive to teach you how to stop. The companies selling you the car, the watch, the bigger house. They need you on the wheel, running faster every year, believing the next purchase is the one that finally makes you look as rich as you feel you deserve to be. But now you've seen the machinery. You've seen the bucket and the holes drilled into it by every dollar spent chasing an image instead of an asset. You've seen the snowball and what happens to the people who let it roll versus the people who cash it in early. You've seen $185 billion vanish in 3 generations, while another fortune, built in the very same decade, is still compounding more than a century later. The only question left is the one your bank account is going to answer for you, whether you make a decision today or not. When the next dollar lands in your hands, will it become a liability, dressed up to look like a reward? Or will it become the very first rotation of your own avalanche?